Leonardo Moretti had built his fortune from nothing, rising from a small Italian town to become one of New York's most powerful business moguls. He had a beautiful wife, Alessia, who was admired for her philanthropic work, and a life that many envied. Yet beneath the polished surface, Leonardo harbored a secret that would soon shatter his world. On a stormy Manhattan evening, fate dealt him a cruel hand. The powerful engine of his Ferrari roared as he sped down the slick city streets, his mistress Isabella laughing beside him. Neither noticed the headlights of a looming truck until it was too late. The violent crash twisted metal and glass, leaving Leonardo unconscious and his world spiraling out of control. The call came in the middle of the night. Alessia rushed to the hospital, her heart pounding with fear and betrayal. As she entered the emergency room, she locked eyes with Isabella, the woman who had been sharing stolen moments with her husband. Pain and fury surged through her veins, but so did something else: clarity. Leonardo had always thrived on power and risk. From the moment he secured a scholarship to Columbia University, he had been relentless. By 38, he was not just wealthy, he was a force in the world of finance, making bold moves that earned him the nickname the Wolf of Wall Street in business circles. His penthouse overlooked Central Park, his name graced magazine covers, and yet none of it had been enough. He had wanted more, and in that hunger for more, he had nearly lost everything. As he regained consciousness, Leonardo's first words were not of regret, but of concern for Isabella. The sting of his betrayal hit Alessia harder than any accident could, but instead of walking away, she stayed. Not for love, at least not yet, but to hear the truth from the man she had once trusted above all else. Days turned into weeks as Leonardo faced the consequences of his recklessness. The media feasted on the scandal, his company's board threatened to strip him of his empire, and his mistress, sensing the shift, disappeared into the shadows. He had spent years building an empire, but in a single night he had come close to losing everything: his fortune, his career, and most importantly, his wife. Sitting beside him one evening, Alessia finally spoke. "Why?" she asked, her voice quiet but firm. His answer was raw, stripped of all bravado. "I thought I was invincible." But he wasn't, and now it was up to her to decide whether the man before her was worth saving. As he reached for her hand, she didn't pull away. Maybe there was still a chance to rebuild, not the life they had, but something new, something real. Alessia had spent years standing beside Leonardo, believing in his promises, trusting in the life they had built together. Yet, something in him had changed. The warmth in his touch had faded, his laughter no longer reached his eyes, and the once effortless intimacy between them felt like a memory slipping through her fingers. She knew the signs: late-night meetings, hurried phone calls, the scent of unfamiliar perfume lingering on his suits. He dismissed her concerns with charming deflections, but deep down, Alessia felt the walls of her marriage begin to crack. Leonardo thrived in a world where power was currency and indulgence was expected. Lavish business dinners, weekends spent rubbing elbows with New York's elite, the thrill of closing a multi-million-dollar deal over a $600 bottle of wine. It was intoxicating. And in that world, he met Isabella Romano, a striking marketing executive with sharp wit and even sharper ambition. They first crossed paths at a high-profile investment conference in Miami. The moment Leonardo spotted Isabella, he was drawn to her confidence, the effortless way she commanded a room. Under the neon lights of the rooftop bar, they exchanged knowing glances, words laced with an unspoken understanding. The attraction was undeniable, the rush of something forbidden igniting a hunger he hadn't felt in years. Their affair began subtly, innocent messages about business, casual coffee meetings that stretched into lingering dinners. But soon, secrecy became part of the thrill. Hidden encounters in luxury hotels, whispered conversations behind closed doors, stolen afternoons that blurred into evenings. Leonardo convinced himself that he was in control, that his double life was nothing more than a carefully balanced equation. Alessia, however, was no fool. She watched him slip further away, his affection growing colder, his excuses more frequent. She had dedicated her life to causes greater than herself, traveling to war-torn regions and underprivileged communities, yet she felt powerless in her own home. The truth hovered on the edge of her consciousness, waiting for the moment it could no longer be ignored. Leonardo believed himself untouchable. The thrill of danger, the rush of deception, the belief that he could have both, the devoted wife and the electrifying mistress, only fed his arrogance. But fate had a way of humbling even the most powerful men. One stormy evening in Manhattan, as rain slashed against towering skyscrapers, Leonardo and Isabella sped through the city in his Ferrari, laughter filling the sleek interior. He gripped the wheel, fueled by the high of another successful deal, the illusion of control wrapping around him like armor. Neither noticed the looming headlights of the truck until it was too late. The violent collision shattered more than metal and glass. It ripped away Leonardo's delusions, exposing the fragility of the empire he had built on lies. The seeds of Leonardo Moretti's downfall had been planted long before he ever realized it. No amount of wealth, influence, or charm could shield him from what was coming. Isabella Romano had always been drawn to power. Raised in Milan by a single mother who worked tirelessly to make ends meet, she understood from a young age that ambition, beauty, and strategy could open doors that talent alone could not. She won a scholarship to an elite private academy where she polished her social finesse, excelling in debate and theater. Later, she pursued a career in marketing, securing a coveted position at a major firm in Rome. But Rome was too small. The real power was in New York. When an offer arrived for a global marketing role at an elite beverage company, she packed her bags without hesitation. Manhattan called to her like a stage beckoning an actress. She craved the energy, the ambition, the endless possibilities that came with playing in a city where the stakes were always high. At nearly 6 feet tall in heels, Isabella radiated confidence. Her jet-black hair, cut into a sleek bob, framed a face that could shift from inviting to intimidating in an instant. She navigated elite corporate events with the ease of someone who understood the game. She knew exactly which hands to shake, which glances to hold, and which conversations to turn into opportunities. It was only a matter of time before she met Leonardo. She knew of him long before their first encounter. His name graced the covers of financial magazines, and he was hailed as one of the most aggressive market players under 40. The moment she stepped into that Miami networking event, she spotted him. A sharp charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, his tie loosened just enough to exude effortless confidence. He had the presence of a man used to being noticed. She let him come to her, playing the role of detached elegance as she swirled her cocktail in one hand. The conversation began as all corporate small talk did: market trends, investment opportunities, upcoming IPOs. But there was something else beneath it. A shift in tone, a lingering glance too long to be casual. Leonardo mentioned his relentless schedule in New York, and Isabella seized the moment. "I work in Manhattan too," she said smoothly. "Perhaps we should compare strategies sometime." The game had begun. Within 2 hours, they had moved from the crowded mixer to an exclusive after-party. The polite banter had transformed into something else entirely. Isabella knew exactly what Leonardo was doing: testing, seducing, seeing how far he could push. She had no intention of resisting. Isabella knew exactly what she was stepping into when she accepted Leonardo's invitation to dinner the following night. Men like him never came without baggage, but that had never been a deterrent for her. Power was intoxicating, and Leonardo carried it effortlessly. Back in New York, her phone lit up at odd hours, texts from him that started as business inquiries, but always drifted into something far more personal. Soon, their encounters became routine. Late-night cocktails at exclusive lounges, stolen afternoons in hidden speakeasies, business lunches that stretched long past the scheduled hour. The secrecy of it all only added to the allure. Leonardo spared no expense. Lavish jewelry arrived at her penthouse door, their weekend escapes hidden under the guise of work trips. A luxury resort in the Hamptons here, a spontaneous getaway to Europe there, nothing was beyond reach. Isabella had never seen herself as anyone's mistress, but she didn't shy away from the privileges that came with being in Leonardo's orbit. At times, a flicker of guilt surfaced. She knew that behind Leonardo's carefully constructed alibis stood a wife who believed in him, who had built a life with him. But she rationalized it away. It wasn't her responsibility to keep him faithful. If he was stepping away from his marriage, that was his choice, not her burden to bear. And so she allowed herself to sink deeper into the affair. convincing herself that perhaps if she played her cards right, she could become more than just a passing thrill. She imagined standing beside him in that sleek penthouse overlooking Central Park, their empire growing together. She envisioned private jets, high-stakes negotiations, and the thrill of building something alongside a man who could match her hunger for success. She played the role of the confidant, the woman who understood him, who never questioned his disappearances or demanded more than he was willing to give. But fate had a way of reminding those who believed they were in control that they never truly were. While Isabella plotted her ascent, Leonardo's wife, Alessia, was growing more aware of the shifting sands beneath her feet. She wasn't the clueless wife people often assumed women in her position to be. Her philanthropic work had taken her to war zones, refugee camps, and some of the world's most fragile communities. She had seen deception before, and she knew the signs of a man slipping away. The dinner appointments he once cherished were now forgotten, his explanations laced with just enough plausibility to hold up under light questioning. An urgent call from a client in Tokyo, a last-minute investor meeting on the West Coast. Each excuse was like a drop in an overflowing glass. But Alessia wasn't one to wait idly. If Leonardo was hiding something, she would find out soon enough. Alessia had always believed in Leonardo, in the life they had built together. He used to tease her about her humanitarian work, calling her a dreamer as she fought for children's education and refugee aid. But now, he barely acknowledged it. When she spoke about her latest project, he would only nod absent-mindedly, his gaze distant, his mind elsewhere. Their Sunday traditions, once sacred, had quietly vanished. No more leisurely brunches at a Michelin-starred restaurant in Soho, no more stolen moments of laughter between hectic schedules. Alessia felt the shift, subtle at first, but now undeniable, like a crack running through glass, waiting to shatter. One cold morning, she decided she couldn't ignore it anymore. As Leonardo grabbed his briefcase, preparing to leave, she stepped into his path in the grand marble foyer. "We need to talk," she said, her voice steady. "I'm worried about us." He glanced at his watch, irritation flickering across his face. "Alessia, I'm late. We'll talk tonight, I promise." But she didn't move. "We haven't talked in weeks. Really talked." She studied him, searching for something. Guilt, regret, anything. "Is there something you want to tell me?" Leonardo sighed heavily. "Work is overwhelming. The deals are bigger, the stakes are higher. That's all." "You're lying." The words hung between them, sharp as a knife. His jaw tensed, his eyes briefly clouded with something. Panic? But in true Leonardo fashion, he recovered quickly, brushing past her. "I'll call you later," he muttered before shutting the door. That was the moment she knew. She had wanted to believe she was overthinking things, but the signs were too obvious. The late-night texts, the hushed phone calls, the unexplained absences, it all painted a picture she didn't want to see. The final blow came when she stumbled upon a receipt from an exclusive fine dining restaurant in Manhattan, dated the same night he had claimed to be working late. 2 entrees, an expensive bottle of wine, but no mention of a business associate. Conflicted between wanting proof and preserving her dignity, she turned to Camille, her closest friend. "You need to confront him," Camille urged, "but be prepared for what you'll find. It might not be easy." Alessia exhaled shakily. "What if this breaks us?" Camille's expression softened. "Then maybe it was already broken?" She wasn't ready to accept that. Not yet. She still clung to memories of the man who once surprised her by donating $500,000 to her charity just because he had seen how much it meant to her. But the man she lived with now, the one who barely looked up when she entered the room, felt like a stranger in her husband's skin. And Alessia wasn't sure which truth was harder to face. While Alessia prepared for an inevitable confrontation, Leonardo was growing bolder. He and Isabella slipped seamlessly into an extravagant lifestyle, private clubs, high-end art gallery openings, even a spontaneous weekend trip to Los Angeles under the pretense of scouting real estate investments. Each lie he spun for Alessia felt easier to deliver, as if he were slowly shedding the weight of his double life and stepping into the role of a man unburdened. Yet, in rare quiet moments, guilt gnawed at him. He silenced it with justifications. Alessia would never understand the rush of his world, the relentless pursuit of success, the sheer adrenaline of being at the top. But as he indulged in his illusions of invincibility, the tension around him crackled. Alessia's intuition sharpened with each passing day, and Isabella, for her part, had begun wanting more than stolen moments. "I'm not just here for fun," she told him one evening, her voice edged with ambition. She didn't want to be hidden away in penthouse suites and secluded villas. She wanted the spotlight, the public acknowledgement that she was more than a secret. The question wasn't if their tangled web of deception would collapse. It was when. And fate had a way of choosing the most brutal timing. That Thursday evening, rain lashed against Manhattan's towering skyline. Leonardo had spent the day sealing a lucrative deal, his name splashed across financial news headlines. In celebration, he took Isabella to an opulent dinner at a five-star steakhouse in Midtown, where they indulged in aged Wagyu and vintage champagne, oblivious to the storm brewing outside, both in the sky and in his carefully curated life. "We should go to Aspen this weekend," Isabella murmured, tracing the rim of her glass. "Just you and me, no distractions." As they stepped outside, the city streets shimmered under the downpour, gutters overflowing, traffic snarled in every direction. Isabella suggested calling for a car, but Leonardo, always impatient, waved it off. He preferred control, the feel of his own hands on the wheel of his sleek black Ferrari. The valet handed him the keys with a polite nod. "Be careful, sir. The roads are slick tonight." Leonardo smirked, unfazed. The world had always bent to his will. Why should tonight be any different? Isabella slid into the passenger seat, her stiletto slipping on the wet pavement. With the roar of the engine, they sped off, weaving between taxis and sluggish SUVs. Rain pounded the windshield, neon city lights blurring into streaks of color. He felt invincible. Neither of them noticed the truck until it was too late. Leonardo felt invincible. The hum of the engine beneath his grip, the rush of speed, the intoxicating presence of Isabella beside him, it all fed the illusion that he was untouchable. Music pulsed from the speakers as rain streaked the windshield, the city's neon glow blurring into abstract shapes. Neither of them noticed Alessia standing beneath the awning of a luxury boutique in Midtown, her heart hammering against her ribs. The custom plates on the Ferrari left no doubt. Even through the heavy downpour, she could make out their silhouettes. Her husband laughing, his hand resting too easily on the wheel, Isabella leaning in, her fingers grazing his arm. The truth struck like a physical blow. Alessia's breath hitched, her vision tunneling. This was the moment she had dreaded, the reality she had refused to name. Without thinking, she stepped off the curb and hailed a taxi, her voice trembling as she gave the driver a single instruction. "Follow that car." She had no plan, no idea what she would do when she caught up to them. Scream? Confront them? Break down right there on the pavement? None of it mattered. She just needed to see how far this betrayal would go. The Ferrari weaved through traffic effortlessly, while Alessia's cab lurched behind, its windshield wipers struggling against the relentless storm. The city's high-rises faded as they moved toward the open highway, where the streets were less congested but far more treacherous. Leonardo, unaware that fate was closing in on him, reveled in the thrill. He gripped the wheel tighter, adrenaline surging from the success of his latest deal and the luxurious dinner that had followed. Isabella laughed at something he said, her fingers trailing lightly along his thigh. She murmured for him to slow down, but her voice was lost beneath the music and the rain. Then, in an instant, everything unraveled. A truck loomed ahead, shifting into their lane without warning. Leonardo reacted on instinct, jerking the wheel sharply to the right. The Ferrari's tires skidded against the rain-slick asphalt, the loss of traction turning a momentary panic into a full-blown catastrophe. Time fractured. The car fishtailed wildly, spinning out of control before slamming into the guardrail with brutal force. Metal crumpled like paper, the impact sending shockwaves through Leonardo's body. The driver's side airbag exploded against his face, a blinding burst of white. Isabella's scream sliced through the night. Behind them, Alessia's taxi came to a screeching halt, the driver cursing as he threw the vehicle into park. She was out of the cab before she had even processed what she was doing, rain soaking through her clothes as she stumbled toward the wreckage. Smoke curled from the hood of the Ferrari, its sleek frame twisted beyond recognition. Leonardo was motionless against the airbag. Isabella, though conscious, was trapped, her voice rising in frantic pleas for help. And Alessia, standing in the pouring rain, felt the final shards of her marriage shatter around her. Without hesitation, Alessia dialed 911. Even as betrayal clawed at her heart, instinct took over. Leonardo needed help. "I've called an ambulance," she shouted toward Isabella, her voice barely carrying over the storm. For a moment, their eyes met, an unspoken understanding passing between them. There was no hiding now. The wife and the mistress thrown together in the worst possible way. The sharp wail of sirens sliced through the night as flashing red and blue lights painted the rain-soaked pavement. Firefighters worked quickly, prying open the wreckage of the luxury sports car, carefully extracting both Leonardo and Isabella. They were battered, but alive. Alessia stood motionless, rain streaming down her face, mixing with silent tears. Her world had shattered along with the twisted metal of the Ferrari. And yet, even now, she couldn't walk away. She hailed another taxi and followed the ambulance, unsure of what she would do when she got there, only knowing she couldn't leave him. The ride to the hospital felt both endless and impossibly short. The driver cast a few sympathetic glances through the rearview mirror, but Alessia didn't notice. Her mind replayed the horror of what she had witnessed. The crash, the smoke, the way Isabella had screamed Leonardo's name. Anger, fear, and something else she didn't want to name twisted inside her. When the taxi pulled up to a prestigious private hospital in Manhattan, she stumbled inside, her body moving on autopilot. The sharp scent of antiseptic filled her lungs as she approached the reception desk. "Leonardo Moretti," she said, her voice unsteady. "He was just brought in from a car accident." The nurse noticed her trembling and offered her a chair. "I'll check on his status. Please wait here." Minutes stretched into eternity. Alessia's thoughts spiraled, rage at his betrayal, terror at the idea of losing him, and the haunting image of his unconscious body slumped against the airbag. She hated him, but did she want him to die? A doctor finally emerged, scanning the waiting area before stepping toward her. "Mrs. Moretti?" She shot to her feet, her heart pounding. "Your husband sustained a significant head injury and internal bruising. We're performing a CT scan to check for any bleeding in the brain." He hesitated, watching her reaction. "He's unconscious, but stable for now. We'll know more soon." Alessia's knees nearly buckled with the weight of it all. She wasn't sure what terrified her more, the idea of Leonardo never waking up, or the reality of what would happen if he did. Alessia's legs felt unsteady. "Can I see him?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor nodded. "He's being transferred to a private room in the ICU. A nurse will take you in shortly." Relief clashed with anxiety as she thanked him, her vision blurred with unshed tears. But as she turned, she spotted someone she had no desire to face, Isabella. Fate had a cruel sense of humor. The woman who had been sharing stolen moments with her husband was now here, a casualty of the same choices that had shattered Alessia's world. Isabella, whose injuries were less severe, was being wheeled down the hallway on a gurney. Their eyes met, the weight of reality crashing down between them. Isabella looked drained, her usual polished composure replaced with raw exhaustion. Blood stained the sleeve of her designer blouse, her dark hair tangled and damp. She hesitated before speaking. "Alessia?" Her voice cracked. Alessia swallowed hard, unsure if she had the strength or the will to respond, but something made her step closer. "He lost control," Isabella murmured, her eyes darting away. "I begged him to slow down. I never wanted this." Her words faltered, tears trailing down her cheeks. Alessia's gaze hardened. "You had no part in this?" The bitterness in her voice was impossible to hide. "You knew he was married, you played along with his lies, and now look where we are." Isabella flinched, unable to hold her stare. A sharp breath escaped Alessia as she turned away. "Stay away from me," she said, her tone final. But as she walked past, something unexpected tugged at her chest. For all her anger, she couldn't ignore the fear in Isabella's voice at the crash site. Sometimes life had a way of stripping down illusions in an instant. A nurse appeared, guiding Alessia through a maze of sterile hallways toward a private intensive care unit in New York. When she stepped inside, the cold reality hit her. Leonardo lay motionless, his face bruised, a bandage wrapped around his temple. The rhythmic beeping of the machines filled the silence. The sterile scent of antiseptics thickened the air. Alessia hesitated before stepping closer. She traced her fingers lightly over his forearm, searching for any sign of warmth, of recognition. Could he sense her presence? Did he even want her here, after all he had done? Hours passed. Doctors came and went, adjusting IV drips, checking monitors. She barely registered them. Calls flooded her phone from Leonardo's business associates, from worried family members, but she answered with a detached, practiced calm. She wasn't leaving. He would wake up, he would face the consequences, and she would be here, waiting. Not out of love, not yet, but for the answers she deserved. By dawn, after a series of medical evaluations, the doctor approached Alessia with an update. "He's lucky," the doctor said. "It could have been much worse. He should regain consciousness within the next 24 hours. Alessia exhaled, slumping into the chair beside Leonardo's bed. Exhaustion weighed her down, but her mind refused to rest. She stared at his pale, motionless face, tracing the path that had led them here. Lavish dinners, unexplained receipts, whispered rumors. Now, in the sterile stillness of a private hospital in Manhattan, the truth lay bare. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, inhaling deeply. One thought echoed relentlessly in her mind. If he survived, and the doctors assured her he would, who would he choose? By midday, Leonardo remained in a deep, medicated sleep. Nurses moved in and out of the ICU, their words meant to comfort her. But Alessia felt none of it. The emotional wounds cut deeper than any reassurance could reach. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't erase the image of him behind the wheel. Isabella beside him, their lives colliding in a moment of reckless indulgence. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly as Alessia, lulled by the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor, drifted into a light sleep. A soft cough jolted her awake. She blinked against the brightness and turned toward the door. Isabella stood there, her left arm in a sling, bandages covering her forehead. Dark circles framed her eyes, making her look even more haunted than before. Alessia's body tensed. "What are you doing here?" Isabella's gaze flickered to Leonardo's unconscious form before returning to Alessia. "I wanted to see if he was okay." Alessia pressed her lips into a thin line. "He's stable. That's all you need to know." Isabella hesitated, then stepped forward. "Please, Alessia, you have every right to hate me, but I care about him. I just needed to know he's going to be all right." A sharp, bitter taste rose in Alessia's throat. She wanted to lash out, to demand how Isabella could stand here, acting as if she had any right to this moment. But then she saw it. The uncertainty, the trembling hands. For the first time, Isabella didn't look like the confident woman who had helped tear apart her marriage. She looked lost. Alessia steadied herself. "The doctors say he'll recover. I assume you were given the same news." Isabella nodded, her voice barely above a whisper. "They discharged me from the ER with minor injuries. I couldn't leave without knowing." She swallowed hard, eyes glistening. "He means a lot to me." Alessia's heart twisted. The weight of betrayal, love, and unanswered questions filled the space between them. But there was one truth she couldn't ignore. No matter how much she wished otherwise, Isabella wasn't the only one waiting for Leonardo's choice. Alessia's anger burned through her, steady and unrelenting. "He's my husband," she said, her voice trembling. "I'm the one who took vows with him. I stood by him through everything, not just when life was easy. So don't stand here and talk to me about how much he means to you." A tense silence filled the hospital room, broken only by the steady beep of the ICU heart monitor. Isabella's eyes flickered to Leonardo's unmoving hand, his fingers resting limply against the hospital sheets. "I never planned this," she whispered. "I didn't go looking for a married man. It just happened." Alessia let out a sharp breath. "That's a convenient excuse. But don't insult me by pretending you didn't know." Isabella swallowed hard, lowering her gaze. She had made choices, ones she could no longer escape, and now they had led her here, standing in front of the woman whose life she had helped unravel. She hesitated before speaking again. "Is there anything I can do?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. Alessia's response was immediate. "You can leave." She folded her arms tightly across her chest. "If he wants to see you after he wakes up, that's his decision. But I won't let you stand here and pretend to be part of his life." Isabella opened her mouth as if to argue, but then she thought better of it. The weight of defeat settled on her shoulders. She cast Leonardo one final, lingering look before stepping out of the room, leaving behind an uneasy hush. Alessia sank into the chair, her exhaustion overtaking the fury that had sustained her. How had her life unraveled into this cruel spectacle? She stared at Leonardo's bruised face, trying to reconcile the man she once loved with the man who had shattered her trust. By late afternoon, the doctor reappeared. "Mrs. Moretti," he said, his tone calm but firm. "Your husband's scans look good. He might regain consciousness soon. We'll assess his cognitive state once he wakes up." Alessia nodded, barely registering his words. The only thing that mattered now was what would happen when Leonardo opened his eyes. A couple of hours later, as the hospital quieted for the evening, his eyelids fluttered. Alessia sat up, her heart pounding. A low moan escaped Leonardo's lips, his face twisting in confusion. "Leonardo," Alessia called softly, leaning forward. "You're in a private hospital in Manhattan. You had a car accident." His eyes flickered, unfocused, as if trying to piece together fragments of a shattered memory. "Alessia?" he murmured, his voice hoarse. "What happened?" Her chest tightened. This was the moment she had both dreaded and anticipated. "You were driving in the storm," she said carefully. "You lost control." She hesitated before delivering the final blow. "Isabella was with you." His entire body tensed. The name alone sent a ripple of recognition through his expression, followed by something that looked dangerously close to shame. Leonardo tried to lift his head, but a sharp pain shot through him, forcing a low groan from his lips. His body felt heavy, every muscle aching as reality seeped back into his consciousness. "Is she okay?" His voice was hoarse, barely audible. Alessia stiffened, withdrawing her hand from his. The question sliced through her, cutting deeper than she expected. "She has minor injuries," she said, her voice controlled but tight. "She's fine. I've been here, watching over you." Leonardo turned his gaze toward her, his eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name. Regret, shame, desperation. Tears glistened at the edges of his lashes. "Alessia, I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice breaking. In that moment, he no longer looked like the man who commanded boardrooms, who closed multi-million-dollar deals without flinching. He looked small, fragile. Alessia swallowed hard, suppressing the wave of emotions crashing inside her. This was only the beginning. A reckoning wasn't something a few words of apology could erase. She nodded, saying nothing, and remained by his side, torn between the pain of betrayal and the weight of everything they had built together. Outside the hospital window, the storm had passed, leaving behind an overcast sky. Somewhere in this building, Isabella was nursing her own regrets. And somewhere beyond that, fate was already setting into motion consequences none of them could yet imagine. Leonardo remained in a luxury private hospital in Manhattan for several days under close observation. The doctors were cautious, monitoring him for potential head trauma. Meanwhile, Alessia rarely left his side. Not out of devotion, not out of love, at least not in the way it once had been, but because she needed answers. On the second day, Leonardo insisted on walking. The IV stand trailed behind him as Alessia helped him down the hallway, his steps slow and deliberate. Each movement sent pain lancing through his ribs, but he refused to stop. "I need to move," he muttered. "I need to think." They passed empty waiting areas, the hum of vending machines the only sound breaking the silence between them. Then finally, Alessia spoke. "Why?" Her voice was steady, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable. "You had everything, Leonardo. A home, a marriage, a life filled with possibilities. Why risk it all?" He exhaled shakily, pausing to lean against the wall. Sweat beaded at his forehead. "I was seduced by the excitement," he admitted, his voice raw. "Everything was easy for me, money, success, but I wanted more. I wanted to feel invincible." Alessia studied him, her eyes filled with quiet pain. "Is that all our marriage was to you? A stepping stone to success?" He shook his head, his breath uneven. "No, I love you, Alessia. I always have. But I got lost. And then Isabella, she made me feel powerful in a different way." Alessia's heart twisted. Was love ever enough to undo this kind of betrayal? "So this is my fault?" Alessia's voice trembled, her pain barely contained. "For not making you feel powerful enough?" Leonardo's eyes darkened with regret. "No, don't twist it. This is on me. I betrayed you." His voice was raw, the weight of his actions pressing down on him. "I can't undo that, but I can try to fix what's left." She searched his face, torn between the anger burning inside her and the sincerity she saw in his eyes. Her heart wavered. "I don't know if this is fixable, Leonardo," she whispered, tears threatening to spill. "You gave Isabella a part of yourself that should have been ours." Without another word, she helped him back to his hospital room. By the time they returned, Leonardo was trembling from the exertion. A nurse frowned but said nothing, quietly helping him ease back into bed. Alessia settled into the chair beside him, exhausted. Leonardo reached for her hand, wincing at the effort. "Do you remember our first anniversary in Venice?" His voice was barely above a whisper. "We sat by the Grand Canal at sunset, and I told you I'd love you for the rest of my life." Alessia's throat tightened. That memory was seared into her soul. The golden light on the water, the way they had laughed, how safe she had felt in his arms. "I remember," she murmured. "This accident." Leonardo paused, struggling to keep his composure. "It made me realize how easily life can end. I don't want to die with regrets. I'm choosing you, Alessia, if you'll still have me." She let out a shaky breath. "That choice isn't so simple." "I know," he admitted, his voice thick with emotion, "but I'll do whatever it takes." A light knock interrupted them. Alessia turned toward the doorway and saw Isabella standing there, her arm still in a sling. Despite being told to keep her distance, she had come anyway. Leonardo stiffened, his expression unreadable. "I'm leaving New York," Isabella said softly, her gaze flickering between them. "I just came to say goodbye. I never wanted this to happen." Alessia's jaw clenched, while Leonardo shut his eyes, his face a mix of guilt and discomfort. "Isabella," he began, his voice tense. "I'm sorry for everything, but Alessia is my wife. I need to make things right." A flash of hurt crossed Isabella's face. Maybe she had expected a softer goodbye. She nodded stiffly, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I understand," she swallowed hard. "I do love you, Leonardo, but I see now, you've made your choice." She turned to Alessia, her voice hesitant. "I'm sorry." Alessia didn't respond. Part of her wanted to unleash her fury, to tell Isabella that apologies wouldn't erase what had happened. But another part of her saw something else, the pain of a woman who had also lost. Alessia said nothing, letting the silence between them say what words could not. Isabella hesitated for a moment longer before turning away, leaving the room and Leonardo for good. Now there was only the wreckage left behind. The weight of betrayal, guilt, and heartbreak settled heavily between them. Yet for the first time in a long while, the air felt strangely clear. The mistress was gone, and Leonardo had made his choice. But what did that mean? Could Alessia find enough strength, enough love to rebuild something from the ruins? Leonardo's slow recovery gave him plenty of time to reflect. The walls of a private hospital suite in Manhattan were both confining and strangely comforting. Here, he couldn't run, he couldn't hide. Every day he forced himself to walk a little farther down the corridor, pushing his body to regain strength. But no matter how much progress he made physically, the nightmares lingered. Screeching tires, shattered glass, the look on Alessia's face when she realized the truth. Meanwhile, Alessia balanced duty with her wounded heart. She spent long hours at his bedside, handling his business affairs when necessary, reading quietly when words felt too heavy. Each time she looked at him, emotions warred within her. Anger, love, pity, hurt. Trust wasn't something that could be rebuilt overnight. Apologies meant nothing without action, without consistency. Time was the only thing that could dull the sting of betrayal, and she wasn't sure if even that would be enough. But something about Leonardo had changed. He no longer took calls at odd hours. He no longer barked orders at his staff. Instead, he simply asked Alessia to text his associates, deferring to her in ways he never had before. His once impenetrable confidence had cracked, replaced by something quieter, something almost humble. Maybe near-death experiences had a way of reshaping people. Or maybe guilt had done what nothing else could. There were moments, small, fragile ones, where they almost felt like themselves again. They spoke about simpler times, reminiscing about their early courtship, their favorite vacations. He asked about her non-profit work, something he had rarely shown interest in before. One night, they even laughed, truly laughed, when she reminded him of the time he had tried to impress her by cooking an elaborate pasta dish, only to nearly set off the penthouse sprinklers. These fleeting moments felt like bridges spanning the chasm between them, delicate but real. Yet, just as a fragile peace began to settle, a new threat loomed. On the 5th day of Leonardo's hospital stay, his personal assistant, Cedric, arrived with urgent news. He found Alessia alone in the corridor just outside the room, his usually composed face laced with tension. "There's something you need to know," Cedric said, lowering his voice. "It's about Leonardo's company, and it's bad." Alessia stood frozen, her pulse hammering in her ears. "What are you saying?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Matteo, Leonardo's personal assistant, shifted uncomfortably. "The firm's legal department is investigating him. They've flagged certain transactions, luxury hotel stays, extravagant dinners, all charged to company accounts. There's speculation that some of the money was funneled toward personal expenses." Alessia's stomach twisted. "You're telling me Leonardo used company funds to finance his affair?" Matteo hesitated. "It appears that way. The board is considering launching a formal inquiry. If they find financial misconduct, they could freeze his shares, possibly remove him from the company entirely. And if it's serious enough," he trailed off, the implication hanging heavy between them. "Legal consequences, public humiliation, everything Leonardo had built, his empire, his reputation, on the verge of collapse." Alessia clenched her fists. She had always known about his extravagant lifestyle, but she had assumed he kept his business and personal finances separate. How reckless had he been? Had he truly believed he was untouchable? "Thank you, Matteo," she murmured, forcing herself to stay composed. After he left, she remained in the hallway, her body trembling. For years, she had admired Leonardo's sharp instincts, the way he turned everything he touched into gold. Now, she saw the darker side of that ambition, the arrogance, the unchecked hunger for more. She steadied herself before stepping back into the luxury hospital suite in Manhattan, where Leonardo lay propped against pillows, his face pale and drawn. "There's an investigation," she said, her voice even. "Your board is looking into financial misconduct. If they find wrongdoing, they could freeze your assets, your shares, possibly more." Leonardo's face drained of color. "I thought I had everything under control," he murmured, eyes dark with guilt. "Yes, I used company funds sometimes. It was easy. No one questioned me. The board trusted me. He swallowed hard. "I was cocky." Alessia sank into the chair beside him, her heart pounding. "They're ruthless when it comes to financial impropriety." He inhaled sharply, wincing as pain shot through his ribs. "I'll fix it. I'll talk to them, pay back everything if I have to." "But Alessia," his voice cracked, "I might lose everything." She stared at him, her expression unreadable. "What does losing everything mean to you, Leonardo?" His lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, he wasn't just facing the loss of wealth or power, he was facing the possibility of losing her. And that, Alessia realized, was the one thing he had never planned for. Leonardo's voice trembled. "I don't want to lose you." His eyes, glassy with emotion, searched hers, desperate for reassurance. "The rest, I'll handle. Whatever it takes. But if I can keep you, if we can find a way forward, maybe that's all that matters now." Alessia studied him, torn between pity and something else. Admiration? Could a man who had spent years chasing power and excess truly change overnight? "I want to believe you," she whispered, "but we can't just snap our fingers and pretend none of this happened." Leonardo nodded, a tear slipping down his cheek. "Then let me earn it. Day by day, I'll come clean to the board, face whatever consequences come. Just don't give up on me." A hush settled between them, broken only by the faint hum of monitors and the distant rumble of city traffic. Outside the walls of a luxury penthouse in Manhattan, the world moved on. But inside, Alessia held his gaze, searching for truth beneath the regret. Trust was fragile, and right now, theirs was in pieces. She hesitated, then slipped her hand into his, squeezing lightly. "I won't leave you," she said, blinking away tears. "But you have to face this, and whatever karma comes your way, you face that too." Leonardo's fingers tightened around hers like a drowning man grasping for a lifeline. Perhaps she was one. But the real test would begin once they left the safe cocoon of the hospital. Outside, a storm of media scrutiny and financial scandal awaited. 1 week after the crash, Leonardo was discharged. Bandaged and moving gingerly, he returned to their penthouse, a place that once felt like a symbol of their success, but now felt more like a museum of their past. The moment they stepped inside, reality crashed down. Staff members hovered anxiously, business calls flooded in, and urgent memos stacked on his desk. The fallout from his recklessness was waiting. "Sir," Matteo said, his tone measured, "the board meeting is scheduled for Friday morning. They expect an explanation regarding the flagged transactions." Leonardo nodded, wincing at the ache in his ribs. "Contact my attorney. I'll be there." Alessia guided him toward their master bedroom, helping him ease onto the bed. She wasn't sure why, but seeing him like this, battered, humbled, stirred something unexpected inside her. For the first time in years, Leonardo Moretti looked small. She sat beside him, watching as exhaustion overtook him. The man who once thrived on control now faced a battle that even he couldn't manipulate. Friday's confrontation with the board would determine more than just his financial future. It would determine theirs. Throughout the week, Leonardo's legal team scrambled to build a defense. They combed through financial records, attempting to reclassify expenses and argue that certain lavish dinners were legitimate business meetings. But a paper trail never lies. The patterns were undeniable. Luxury hotel stays in Manhattan, private clubs frequented by Isabella, extravagant weekends that couldn't be spun as corporate spending. The best they could hope for was damage control. On Friday morning, Alessia, dressed in a navy blazer and pencil skirt, determined to support him despite everything. Leonardo, clad in a tailored suit that hid most of his bruises but not the exhaustion in his face, was silent on the drive over. The elevator ride up to his firm's headquarters felt endless. When the doors finally opened, they stepped into a sleek boardroom lined with polished wood and towering windows overlooking the city. Around the long oval table sat the board members, expressions unreadable, but their judgment already cast. At the head of the table sat Lawrence Chen, the firm's chairman and a longtime associate of Leonardo's. He wasted no time. "Leonardo," Chen began, his voice cold, "we appreciate you coming in person, especially given your recent accident. But we must address the allegations of misappropriation of company funds. Would you care to explain?" Leonardo swallowed hard and stood, wincing slightly from the pain that still lingered. Alessia remained seated behind him, her heart hammering. I take full responsibility," he said, voice uneven. "I let personal matters interfere with proper accounting procedures. Some expenses were not strictly business-related." A murmur rippled through the room. "I'm prepared to reimburse the company for every flagged expense," he continued, "and I will step down from making financial decisions until this matter is resolved." Chen's sharp gaze didn't waver. "Are you denying that you knowingly used company funds for personal affairs?" Leonardo's throat tightened. "I can't deny it," he admitted, his voice subdued. "I made a mistake." Alessia scanned the room. Some board members shifted uncomfortably, men who had once hailed Leonardo as a financial genius, now watching him unravel. Others exuded quiet disdain, their judgment cutting through the silence. One member finally spoke. "And what about the negative press? This kind of scandal could destroy investor confidence." Leonardo's attorney stepped forward. "Mr. Moretti is willing to offer a financial settlement covering all misused funds, plus a penalty to demonstrate good faith." Chen leaned back in his chair, considering. The tension in the room was suffocating. For years, Leonardo had stood at the pinnacle of power, untouchable. Now, he was reduced to a man bargaining for redemption. And Alessia couldn't help but wonder, was this the price of his arrogance, or the beginning of something else? "We can negotiate terms to keep this matter internal and avoid lawsuits." A hushed discussion spread across the table. Finally, Lawrence Chen raised a hand for silence. "We'll take a short recess," he announced. "Please wait outside." Leonardo exhaled shakily as Alessia took his arm, guiding him into the hallway. They found an empty lounge, sinking onto a leather sofa. The air was thick with uncertainty. "You did what you had to," Alessia said softly, placing a hand over his. "No more lies." Leonardo nodded, exhaustion deepening the lines on his face. "I just hope they don't force me out completely. Half my life has been built in that boardroom." After 10 agonizing minutes, they were summoned back. The board had reached a decision. Chen cleared his throat. "We accept your offer to reimburse the company and pay the penalty. In return, we won't press criminal charges." Leonardo's breath caught, but Chen wasn't finished. "However, you must resign as CEO immediately. You'll retain some shares, but your controlling stake is forfeit, until further notice. Silence fell over the room. Leonardo's shoulders sagged, relief and sorrow colliding in his expression. "Thank you," he said, voice hoarse. "I understand." Chen's gaze softened, if only slightly. "We appreciate your contributions, Leonardo, but it's best for everyone that we part ways like this." One by one, the board members filed out. Some offered curt nods, others didn't meet his gaze at all. Alessia guided him to the elevator, her mind spinning with the weight of finality. When they stepped out onto the street, the media had already sniffed out the story. Photographers snapped pictures. Reporters shouted questions. A blinding flurry of camera flashes reflected off the glass towers around them, illuminating the grim set of Leonardo's face. Alessia gripped his arm, shielding him as best she could while they pushed through the chaos. In the car, they sat in silence. The radio played a subdued jazz tune, its soft notes clashing with the tension thick in the air. Leonardo stared out the window at the Manhattan skyline, a single tear slipping down his cheek. Alessia watched him quietly, remembering the man who once stood untouchable, commanding rooms with ease. Now, stripped of power and influence, he was forced to see what truly mattered. But at what cost? Losing the CEO position sent a seismic shock through Leonardo's world. No office to go to, no urgent deals to finalize, no staff awaiting his orders. His phone buzzed less frequently now, only the occasional reporter fishing for a statement or a once loyal associate hesitantly checking in. The world that once revolved around him had suddenly become very still. And for the first time in his life, Leonardo Moretti didn't know what came next. Leonardo's calendar emptied overnight. The phone calls slowed. The world he once dominated had quietly moved on. Meanwhile, Alessia wrestled with emotions she couldn't fully untangle. She had promised not to leave him, but the weight of betrayal still sat heavy on her heart. She saw his efforts, his sincerity in wanting to make amends. He was more attentive, more humble, and he had severed all contact with Isabella. Yet betrayal left scars that couldn't simply fade with time. As for Isabella, she disappeared from their lives. Mutual acquaintances mentioned she had taken a marketing job overseas, possibly in Europe. Alessia didn't ask for details. It was enough to know that the woman who had cast a shadow over her marriage was now just a distant memory. But the damage had already been done. Isabella's presence still haunted her thoughts, a lingering ghost she couldn't quite banish. Financially, things became uncertain. Though Leonardo still had substantial wealth, much of it was tied up in legal battles and settlements. To cover the financial penalties imposed by the firm, he began liquidating assets. His rarely used luxury penthouse in Manhattan, a collection of expensive artwork, and even what remained of his prized Ferrari, now little more than a battered wreck. Each sale chipped away at the identity he had spent years crafting. Alessia never complained. She had grown up in a modest but loving household and knew they could live comfortably without extravagance. But she watched as Leonardo struggled, unaccustomed to the idea of scaling back. In an attempt to help him find purpose, she convinced him to join her on one of her charity missions. A short trip to a rural community outside Monterrey, Mexico, where a new school was being built for underprivileged children. In the past, Leonardo would have scoffed at the idea, citing pressing business matters. Now, with time on his hands and a heart searching for redemption, he agreed. When they arrived, the construction site was a swirl of dust and sun-baked cinder blocks. Local volunteers worked tirelessly under the heat, laughter ringing through the air as barefoot children ran around, giggling at the visitors. Alessia introduced Leonardo to the project coordinators. At first, he looked out of place, uncomfortable, sweat beading at his temple as he struggled with the language barrier. Gone were the tailored suits and boardroom commands. Here, there was no title, no power to wield. But something unexpected happened. As he spent hours mixing concrete, handing out donated supplies, and seeing the sheer joy on the children's faces, a new sensation crept in, something foreign yet strangely fulfilling. For the first time in years, Leonardo felt like he was building something real. One little boy clung to Leonardo's arm, fascinated by his watch. The child traced its edges with small fingers, eyes wide with wonder. Without hesitation, Leonardo unstrapped it and slipped it onto the boy's wrist. For a moment, the child's entire face lit up with joy. A surge of unexpected emotion tightened Leonardo's throat. He felt tears prick the corners of his eyes, something he hadn't experienced in years. Alessia, noticing, gently touched his arm. "You okay?" she asked softly. He swallowed hard and nodded. "I'm fine. This is different. It's real." They spent 3 days in the village, living simply in a modest guest house in Mexico, sharing local meals and learning about the struggles of the community. Each evening, beneath a sky littered with stars, Alessia and Leonardo sat outside, speaking in hushed voices about life, regrets, and what the future could hold. For the first time in a long while, their conversations went beyond surface-level exchanges or tense arguments. On their final day, as they prepared to leave, a group of children ran up to them with handmade cards. Leonardo held one in his hands, its edges slightly crumpled, the words written in shaky handwriting. "Gracias, Señor Leonardo." Inside was a crayon drawing of a smiling family. He stared at it, gripping the paper as though it were more valuable than any stock portfolio he had ever owned. When they returned to New York, something in him had shifted. Alessia noticed it almost immediately. Leonardo stepped away from his phone more often, spent his evenings reading about philanthropy, and even asked about her nonprofit work, something he had barely acknowledged before. He no longer seemed like the relentless financial shark she once knew. And maybe that was a good thing. Rebuilding trust wouldn't happen overnight. They started attending marriage counseling, peeling back layers of resentment, frustration, and guilt. Alessia allowed herself to begin forgiving him, but she kept firm boundaries in place. She would never tolerate deception again. Leonardo, for his part, committed to transparency. He handed over access to his phone without hesitation, shared his schedule openly, and ensured Alessia always knew where he was. Karma had struck him hard, leaving him physically battered, financially strained, and publicly disgraced. Yet, in the wreckage of his old life, he discovered something wealth and power had never given him: a sense of genuine purpose. He channeled his energy into a new charitable foundation, using his business acumen to support educational programs and community initiatives. His focus shifted from dominance to contribution, aligning his world more with Alessia's than his old one. Their marriage remained fragile, like a vase shattered and pieced back together. The cracks would always be there, reminders of what had been broken. But somehow, through pain and resilience, something new was being forged, a bond tempered by adversity, imperfect yet stronger than before. In the end, the man who once believed he was untouchable had been forced to confront his limits. Leonardo had chosen his wife over his mistress, stepping into the storm of consequences that followed. Though the path ahead was scattered with the wreckage of his past mistakes, it also led to something unexpected: a future where he and Alessia could stand side by side. Wiser, more humble, and perhaps, in a strange twist of fate, stronger than before. His fall from grace had stripped him of everything: his title, his influence, his illusion of control. But it had also given him something far more valuable: a second chance to rebuild, not just his reputation, but his very sense of self. Thank you for following the tumultuous journey of Leonardo, Alessia, and the mistress who nearly shattered their world. From the dizzying heights of a luxury penthouse in New York City to the humbling corridors of a hospital room, we witnessed how one man's choices sent ripples through every aspect of his life. His financial empire crumbled. His name became synonymous with scandal, and a near-fatal accident forced him to choose between a fleeting indulgence and the unwavering love of his wife. If you found this story compelling, please like this post, share it with someone who appreciates the unpredictable twists of fate, and subscribe for more dramatic tales of loyalty, betrayal, and unexpected redemption. Your support allows us to continue producing in-depth narratives that remind us of one simple truth: no one is immune to mistakes, but the journey to redemption is what defines us. Stay tuned for more content, and thank you for reading. 1 year had passed since the world Leonardo Moretti once ruled came crashing down. The scandal had faded from the headlines, replaced by newer, shinier scandals of the wealthy elite. His name was no longer whispered in exclusive boardrooms, and the financial world had moved on without him. The man who once thrived on power had been forced to redefine himself, not as a CEO, not as an untouchable business mogul, but simply as a man trying to rebuild. Alessia watched him closely over the past year. She had waited for signs that his transformation was real, not just another strategic maneuver. And to her surprise, he hadn't fallen back into old patterns. Their marriage, though still fragile, had begun to take on a new shape. They weren't the same people they had once been. Perhaps they never would be, but there was something raw and honest about what they were becoming. They had dinner together without distractions. They talked. Really talked. And for the first time in years, Leonardo didn't seem like a man trying to control the world around him. He simply existed in it. He had poured his energy into his new charitable foundation in New York, funding education programs and supporting underprivileged youth. It wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with power, prestige, or magazine covers. But when Alessia watched him interacting with the students, helping build something tangible, she saw something she hadn't seen in years. Fulfillment. One evening, as they walked through Central Park, a light autumn breeze rustling the trees, Leonardo slipped his hand into hers. It was a small gesture, but it held weight. "I know I'll never undo what I did," he said, voice steady. "But I also know I don't want to live in the past anymore. I just want to move forward, with you." Alessia didn't respond right away. She had spent months holding on to anger, fear, and doubt, unsure if she could ever truly trust him again. But standing there, looking into the eyes of a man who had been stripped of everything and still chose to stay, she realized something. She had already started moving forward too. Maybe love wasn't about forgetting the past. Maybe it was about choosing, every day, to build something stronger from the cracks. She squeezed his hand, a quiet answer in the dark, and for the first time in a long time, neither of them looked back. Dear friend, so we've just come to the end of this story. But perhaps you're asking yourself, why did I choose to tell you this? Maybe that question lingers in your mind right now. This isn't just a story about betrayal, wealth, or redemption. It's a reflection of real life, a reminder that in this unpredictable world, anything can happen. Life, much like the universe itself, often throws us into unexpected storms, forcing us to confront truths we'd rather ignore. Sometimes, these challenges feel cruel, unfair, even unbearable. But what if I told you that every hardship is a lesson waiting to be understood? There are moments in life when we are forced to graduate from an old version of ourselves. These are the moments when everything we thought we knew is stripped away, leaving us raw and exposed. It happens to men who believe they are invincible, to women who build their worlds around trust, and to those who stand in the shadows, uncertain of where they belong. This story isn't just about a millionaire who nearly lost everything. It's about the test of character, the test of resilience, and the test of love. Because in truth, everyone in this story was being tested. Leonardo faced the collapse of his empire, but his true battle wasn't financial. It was internal. Could he let go of the power that had once defined him? Could he learn to rebuild without manipulation, without control? Alessia, on the other hand, wasn't just the betrayed wife, she was someone forced to confront her own strength. Could she still trust, still love, after being shattered? Could she separate who her husband once was from who he was becoming? Even Isabella, the mistress, faced her own reckoning. She entered this world seeking passion, excitement, perhaps even validation. But in the end, she had to walk away, knowing she had lost. And so, my friend, I ask you, how do you respond when life tests you? The philosophy of Stoicism teaches us a powerful truth. We do not control what happens to us, only how we react. We cannot dictate another person's thoughts, choices, or betrayals. We cannot rewrite the past. But we can control our own actions, our own integrity, and the way we carry ourselves through pain. In the end, this story is about virtue, about looking inward rather than outward. It's about learning that true strength isn't found in power or wealth. It's found in self-awareness, in the ability to rise after falling, and in the courage to move forward even when the path is uncertain. And now I turn to you. What did this story make you feel? Did it remind you of something in your own life? Did it change the way you see relationships, forgiveness, or even yourself? I would love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections, your own experiences, and your lessons learned. Because at the end of the day, we are all just stories waiting to be told. Thank you for being here, thank you for listening, and most of all, thank you for thinking. Until next time.